Well, folks, the stakes are rising again in Russia. Not only are passports now being confiscated from officials within Russia to prevent defections, as reported by the Financial Times. This is clearly a sign that at least some within the Russian leadership are worried that underlings might decide, you know what, I've had enough. It's time to leave. Apparently, there is so much fear, by the way, of not just defections, but potential sabotage within the actual country that now there is a report circulating by The Independent that take a look at this. The Independent is now reporting that the Kremlin is literally creating replica offices to help avoid the potential assassination of Vladimir Putin. But this segment is not only going to be about Russia freaking out, it is also about Ukraine and the suggestion they make to being willing to negotiate again, but also the threat of World War III. So, a lot to cover. First, take a look at this. Vladimir Putin apparently installs perfect replicas of his Kremlin office to avoid assassination attempts, a former bodyguard of the Russian president has said. That Russian president, that former bodyguard, by the way, a 35-year-old, served as an engineer in the Federal Guard Service, the Presidential Communications Unit, and said he has fled Russia over the war in Ukraine. So he's already gone, and now he's leaking intelligence, essentially. Although, is it still considered a leak if you're not an insider? But anyway, apparently leaking insight that Vladimir Putin has perfect replicas of his office. He's installed these replicas in order to confuse foreign intelligence. So there are no assassination attempts, or I suppose no successful assassination attempts. This is the first attempt to confuse a foreign intelligence so that there are no assassination attempts. This individual told opposition groups. I highly doubt that, by the way. I highly doubt this is the first attempt to confuse foreign intelligence. Maybe this is just the one they were willing to quote unquote leak. I have found that most things in politics that get leaked, by the way, are almost intentionally leaked because that way you could say, we didn't mean to reveal that, but it still gets revealed anyway. Oh no, our one tool to disguise the president has been leaked. Oh no, whatever will we do? But it is being used, at least over here, as a way of looking at potential some anti-Russian propaganda to say the Russians are losing it. After all, I mean, they did arrest the editor, one of the writers for the Wall Street Journal, the day after he published a piece talking about how the Russian economy was starting to fail, that they're running out of money, and not only are they running out of money, but that their currency has been devalued by over 20%. And get this, in a report just yesterday by the Financial Times, we find that Russia has maybe 2 to 6 months left of parts for their aircraft. Now that's scary. And I'm not just talking about military aircraft, I'm talking about commercial aircraft. See, commercial aircraft, which 97% of the aircraft flying in Russia used by Russian companies like Aeroflot, 97% of them are using Western machinery. In other words, Western aircraft, whether those are Brazilian, European, or American, Airbus, Boeing, Embraer, whatever. These companies provide software updates and parts for planes. And let me tell you, as a jet owner, there is nothing that needs more parts and more maintenance and more updates and more manuals than a freaking jet. It's really expensive. And if you stop maintaining the darn thing, the birds start becoming inoperable. Not because they can't fly, but because you shouldn't fly them, because so much crap is wrong with them. So then you just park them in a hangar and you start having less planes that you can actually fly. In fact, there are these classifications for Russian planes, these classifications actually for all planes, for inspections that planes have to undergo. And we have some stats on the Russian numbers. There is a C check. A C check is to be conducted every 2 years. It is a structural check of the plane. There are 159 Boeing and Airbuses due for C checks in 2023. There is a Delta check that is due every 10 years. It is a major inspection. It is probably the largest inspection for a plane every 10 years. It basically goes through every piece of the plane to check for corrosion. And there are 85 planes in Russia with D checks due. Recently, in December, a CEO of the Aeroflot Russian Airlines PJSC said they have 2 to 6 months of parts left, and they're slowly just taking planes out of service. So Russia is literally crumbling from the inside out as this war is progressing. But not only do we have this Russian crumbling, but of course we have more lashing out by Vladimir Putin, suggesting that, well, the U.S. not supported the revolution in Ukraine in 2014, we wouldn't be in this situation. So in other words, this harkens all the way back to the days of the Obama administration and when Russia first invaded Crimea. Now, this starts leading us to want to at least scratch our heads about the potential nuclear perils that we now face. We're going to talk about this in just a moment. But first, we have to remember that, wait a second. What is Ukraine suggesting right now? Ukraine is suggesting, hey, you know what? We are willing to negotiate with Russia, but we're only willing to negotiate with Russia once again, which we have not negotiated or attempted to negotiate with Russia since last April. It has literally been a year since they have tried to negotiate with Russia, which that's frustrating because it suggests there's literally no even attempt at peace talks right now, which is scary because as there are no attempts of peace talks, World War III and a nuclear World War III is coming closer and closer and closer. It's absolutely ridiculous. So what is Ukraine saying right now? Well, Ukraine is saying, hey, we will gladly negotiate with Russia right after we take Crimea back. Yes, I kid you not. That is what Ukraine said today. From Kyiv, military officials in Kiev, however you want to say it, today said, we will gladly negotiate with Russia after we take Crimea back. Well, come on, folks. That is a big ask right there. First of all, not necessarily a big ask in negotiations. I mean, that certainly could be considered a big ask in negotiations. But you're basically saying, we're going to take all the 10 tanks we have. They have more. I'm being facetious because we're waiting for more tanks to arrive from Poland and Germany, and they're arriving very slowly in the United Kingdom. We're going to take these tanks we have, we're going to go try to plow through Crimea to take it back, as if Russia's not going to be able to substantially fight back in Crimea. It is a very big ask to say, oh, we'll be willing to negotiate as soon as we take Crimea. I mean, hey, you know what? Look, if they could take Crimea back and then they can negotiate with Russia and Russia takes over, or Russia gives up rather and negotiates, fine, then you were right. I just think you've set a very, very high bar to being willing to negotiate again. And unfortunately, that leads us down the path of potentially nuclear warfare, which we're going to talk about that in Finland in just a moment. But I'd like to remind you of this chart right here. What country provides the most aid to Ukraine? Is it the not country of the European Union, given that is a union of many different countries? Or is it the United States? Oh, that's right. It's the United States, providing over 78, we're probably well over $80 billion now in either humanitarian, direct financial, or military aid to Ukraine, which is more than twice what the European Union has provided. Here are some of the examples of the arsenal that we have provided: Patriot missiles, Javelins, Stinger missiles, anti-aircraft missiles, howitzers, explosive drones, Phoenix Ghost drones, Bradleys, Harpoon coastal defense systems, ground support vehicles, including 1,700 Humvees. This is from the Council on Foreign Relations. This is a lot of spending. Now, in fairness, as a percentage of GDP, the countries most near to the conflict are investing the most into this. That includes Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. In fairness, we want to mention that. Now, what about this threat of nuclear warfare? And what does all of it have to do with potentially, the rise of Finland? Finland, after all, just joined NATO. That's a little bit of a oopsie doopsies because we're basically telling Putin, hey, not only are we unwilling to negotiate with you, but we don't really care if we have to confront nuclear peril as you potentially move more nuclear weapons into Belarus. You've already abandoned the START Treaty. We're going back to the Cold War era. We're going back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, where basically you are now pointing strategic nuclear weapons from Belarus potentially at Poland. Okay, it's a problem. It's a risk and a danger. Not only that, but look at this. Here's a piece right here. Finland joins NATO. Finland officially becomes the 31st member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization on Tuesday, marking a major shift in the security landscape in northeastern Europe that adds some 830 miles to the alliance front with Russia. Now, the problem with this is now we have Russia even more pissed, suggesting that they're potentially going to scale up forces near Finland if Finland ends up putting, or NATO ends up putting any troops and equipment on the border of Russia. Now, remember this. You could take a train, a very short train from St. Petersburg to Finland. You start getting NATO troops put on the edge of Finland looking into Russia. Russia's going to feel pretty dang threatened. This is one of the reasons they've started moving nuclear weapons, strategic weapons, into Belarus as an attempt to try to deter exactly this type of NATO expansion. Well, the NATO expansion has happened anyway. Some quotes here from NATO, or from rather Russia's deputy foreign minister. We will strengthen our military capabilities in the West and Northwest if members of NATO deploy forces and equipment on Finnish territory. Yeah, I don't even know what accent that is. Anyway, this is exactly the reason why you need to get life insurance, and it's almost 5 minutes paid promotion. Prior to Tuesday, Russia shared about 755 miles of land border with 5 NATO members. Finland's ascension more than doubles the border with Russia. NATO's border with Russia has now been doubled. Think about that. Obviously, this is deemed to be good for Finland. Remember that an attack on one is an attack on all. We had a scare once as a stray missile accidentally fell in the Polish territory, and Article 4 was invoked to evaluate whether or not this was actually a violation of potentially Article 5. The Finnish Defense Force also operates weapon systems like other NATO members, including F-18 fighter jets, German-designed Leopard battle tanks, K-9 howitzers, amongst other weapons. There are obviously 3 ways Finland benefits here: reserve forces, tech access, and artillery forces. Artillery forces being some of the largest in Europe over in Finland, with some 1,500 artillery weapons sitting in Finland. Finland also has about 900,000 reservists they can muster up, wartime strength of about 200,000 standing troops. The mindset here is that Sweden is obviously next to join. That is then, of course, going to lead to thoughts that Turkey and Hungary might potentially end up joining. This kind of expansion is likely to continue pushing the following right here, which we talk about via the Foreign Affairs article, confronting the nuclear peril. And I'm not going to go through this entire piece because part of it they talk about implementing global failsafes to prevent catastrophe. I'm saying that up front because the argument of this article is the reason we should be worried about Russian expansion of their desire to continue to promote the deployment of, or should I say, the positioning of nuclear weapons, is the potential for an accident. Look, Vladimir Putin has already announced that short-range tactical nukes are going to Belarus. China is expanding its nuclear weapons program. And keep in mind, Russia's got like 5,900 warheads. That might be as much as 6,000 now. The United States has maybe around 5,400, 5,500. So Russia technically is slightly more than ours. I think ours are probably of better quality, and we have probably many more functional. But China only has 300. But all of this is urging a lot of countries to expand the proliferation of nukes, not reduce. We're supposed to be under nuclear non-proliferation agreements, which means non-expansion agreements. We won't build more nukes. Well, now everybody's like, well, Russia's playing with their nukes, so we want to play with our nukes as well. This is obviously a problem. especially since conversations between Moscow and Russia are basically at zero. Dialogue is basically frozen. That's a problem. It's a problem because, wait a minute. We're supposed to be trying to implement diplomacy, not just fighting to try to end this war. Well, so far, there's basically no diplomacy. That's a fancy word, by the way, for talking your way out of a crisis. There's a growing danger that nuclear weapons could be used based on faulty judgment, false warnings of attack, or other miscalculation, aided by cyber attacks. And this is a global threat. Foreign Affairs magazine is basically telling us the reason every American and every individual in the world should be nervous about the expansion and proliferation of nuclear weapons is not necessarily because we actually think Putin is going to have the balls to use a nuclear weapon, or that Xi Jinping is going to do it, or that Biden is going to do it. It's actually that what if somebody somehow cyber attacks and somehow impersonates a leader through artificial intelligence, generated video, generated voice, combined with cyber attacks to potentially lead Minutemen who are on standby to launch nuclear weapons, to essentially launch nuclear weapons. Okay, that is the fear. That is why Foreign Affairs is talking about figuring out how can we have fail-safes to prevent this kind of disaster. This is bad. It's very, very bad. Okay, we do not want this sort of expansion because remember, the available strategies to reduce the nuclear threat have been built since the Cuban Missile Crisis. But unfortunately, those continue to close. And it becomes hard to imagine, says Foreign Affairs magazine, that a new treaty on nuclear arms can be negotiated between the United States and Russia. Unrestricted nuclear competition between Washington and Moscow will now overlap not only with China's expanding nuclear arsenal, but growing threats from North Korea and Iran, and also be compounded by those of India and Pakistan, both also nuclear-armed countries, to advance their capabilities, even while some U.S. allies consider whether to acquire their own. Remember, a lot of countries in Europe say they don't want nukes anymore, but now all of a sudden maybe people want nukes. It's a problem. It's a big problem. And if the world is going to survive, every nuclear-armed country has to work to strengthen its defenses against those cyber threats we talked about. The problem is, what if we don't? And what if that cyber attack happens? Listen to this. A number of factors have contributed to heightened nuclear blunder risks, including faster and more powerful delivery systems. In other words, these missiles can fly faster than ever before. The rise of cyber threats and the dependence on launch systems and digital technologies that might be dated, as well as even if we have advanced digital technologies for launch systems, what if the other countries don't? It's a disaster. The Biden administration has given a priority to nuclear security, committing to a fail-safe review in October of 2022. But what about the other countries? That's the question. What's everybody else going to do? But again, folks, it's not just this. Let's hop on over to, what do we have here? We have Xi Jinping meeting with Emmanuel Macron of France. And there's this idea that maybe Emmanuel Macron, who's landed with, this is the French president, who's landed in Beijing, hopefully he doesn't talk about Social Security or the retirement age going up in Beijing. He might cause some riots. That might be too soon to joke about. But anyway, in Beijing, he's landed to talk to Xi Jinping. There's this idea that Macron might be willing to talk to Xi Jinping about the cooperation with Russia and maybe urge Xi Jinping to make it clear that China is not going to supply lethal weapons to Russia. I don't know if he hasn't realized this yet, but it's too late for that. China has already been delivering lethal weapons to Russia. So it's too late to urge China not to do that. I'm unclear if China has, or if the French president has missed that boat. But anyway, this shows you some of the concerns around rising threats, not only around nuclear war, but also around the rising threat that the prices for the programs on building your wealth may be going up. Well, actually, will be going up on April 12th, maybe going up soon, very soon. In your case, that is on the 12th, we'll be seeing the prices for the programs on building your wealth going up again. You can now use buy now, pay later to join them. You can go to meetkevin.com to see all about them. You can also scroll down to see my affiliates or sponsors, including short form or life insurance or free stocks. And of course, you can use buy now, pay later now to join the programs on building wealth. Right now, we are about 33% of individuals who are signing up are using buy now, pay later to sign up for the programs on building your wealth. It's lifetime access. A link down below, and we'd love to see you there. But of course, this threat of a nuclear conflict is very concerning. I personally believe that we, you know, I hate to say this because I don't want to sound political, but let me just put it this way. There is one person who is making it absolutely clear that we need to do everything in our power to negotiate with Putin and Zelensky as soon as possible. And like him or not, that person's name is Donald Trump. That person is, I'm not saying I would vote for them in the next election. I'm just simply saying they are the ones, that person is pounding the table, begging for negotiation. And so far, what do we have? China pretending to negotiate. Macron's not going to get anything done. Biden's not doing anything. All we're doing is sending more money and more weapons to Ukraine and basically joining more people into NATO, while at the same time, Putin's worried about getting assassinated in his own Kremlin, so he's making replica offices and sending more nukes to various different areas like Belarus. To me, that's scary. I wish we had more people waking up to the real threat of World War III and waking up and demanding a negotiated settlement as soon as possible. What's the point of holding on to every inch of your damn land if it is now a badland, a wasteland, leveled, worthless, a Chernobyl? There's no point. Give up some of it, negotiate something, give Russia a buffer, end the death and destruction. Land is not worth people dying, especially if that land is going to be devastated anyway. It's stupid. It needs to end. Anyway, that's my take on this Ukrainian disaster.